Welcome to the Project Bring Me Life podcast, talking about the spiritual awakening, metaphysics, and holistic health with artists, musicians, guides, writers, healers, and supporters. So please join us. Wake up and shine on.
Hello everybody, thank you for waking up and shining on with us tonight.
We appreciate you, and we appreciate your ears, because, I don't know, this is going to be a great episode.
Of course it's going to be a great episode, because we're Tuesday people.
We are Tuesday people, and today should be Tuesday, and that's if you're listening in our archives, which could be any day of the week.
That's true, but we post new podcasts every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday.
Quite nearly every
Pretty much
Tuesday.
every Tuesday.
Pretty much, yeah. It's pretty, and it's beautiful.
So check out new podcasts on projectbringmelife.com or our Spreaker. But yeah, so this is a new podcast and we are excited about it.
Super excited. This episode, we interview Mark David Gerson, who is a birthing your book guru. Pretty much what he does is he helps people break through, if they have writer's block or creativity blocks. This is all about breaking through your writing experiences. And he's really out of the box with the way he teaches writing. And, it's really amazing. And if you're into writing, even if you're not into writing, but still are curious about it, this is a good episode for you.
For sure. I think it's a really good time for this episode to air, too, as so many people are needing to take some time into their personal self and just, do a self-inventory. So writing is a really great way to do that. And Mark David gives us a great way to do so.
Yeah, and this is a video podcast. So if you're listening to us on iTunes or Spreaker or Stitcher or any of those audio platforms, check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/projectbringmelife. And most of our podcasts are in video, so check out our videos, and especially check out this one because Mark David is a beautiful man. He has a beautiful beard, and his smile it brings joy to my heart.
Yep, so leave us a comment and stay tuned.
The PBM2L podcast will return shortly after a brief message from our sponsors.
Hi guys, are you looking for help finding your twin flame? Maybe you need help finding a message from your spirit guides or the Ascended Masters. Patrizia Luna is a psychic medium, master Reiki healer, and a spiritual coach that is indeed in direct communication with the angels, archangels, ancestors, and the Ascended Masters. She also does angel moon rituals for blessings and has over 20 years experience with the tarot and oracle readings. Patrizia would love to help you in the most humblest way possible and will also help you discover your gifts and open doors to your spiritual path. You can contact her today by adding her on Skype at Blue Angel 444-811 or by calling the number 514-585-3526. Again, her name is Patrizia Luna, and she would love to hear from you. Plan a session today and give her a call at 514-585-3526 or find her on Skype at Blue Angel 444-811. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to this message from our sponsors. Now back to the Project Bring Me Life episode.
All right, and welcome back, everybody. Please help us welcome our guest for today, Mark David Gerson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Oh yeah, I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yes.
Yeah. I consider myself a writer as well, and we have a lot of people who are coming to the project who are writers. And so I guess my first question I was really looking forward to asking you is what would you consider a writer? Like, what is the definition of a writer?
That's easy. Someone who writes, period. To ask me what an author is or a screenwriter is, you're just asking for a writer. So if you write, you're a writer. There's nothing complicated about it.
Yeah, I was listening to one of the interviews, and you said somebody had won awards for some poems or maybe short stories.
Short stories, yeah.
And they didn't consider themselves a writer even after that.
Yeah, she was working with me on I do coaching work as well, and she was working with me on a novel, and she could not, because she hadn't written long form fiction before, only short story, only, only short stories that had happened to have won awards. She could not bring herself to call herself a writer. And I get that a lot. People just have a hard time with that word.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So, you're obviously a writer, as Sila mentioned, and you mentioned being a life coach. What are some other things that you do that share with our audience?
Sure. Well, I write, obviously. I write fiction and nonfiction. I write screenplays. I have a stage musical in process. I'm also a photographer and an artist. And I do work as a coach with people who are dealing with writing issues, creativity issues, life issues, and I also speak. So that kind of covers it. It's all creative stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. How did you get into that?
Which part?
The writing and creativity coaching.
Well, I spent a lot of years resisting. When I was in school, I hated anything creative, or so I thought. I was actually scared of anything creative, I guess is probably a better way of putting it. In retrospect, I would say I was terrified of the judgment, of being judged. I gravitated toward math classes because there was one right answer, and I knew if I got it right, I couldn't be judged. Whereas when you're dealing with anything creative, it's all shades of gray, and everyone has an opinion. And I guess I was just really scared of again being judged harshly. I joke in a couple of my books that my muse had designs on me from way, way back. When I was in high school, I was somehow talked into doing the publicity for a couple of musicals in my final 2 years. And so I had to write. I had to write press releases and do that sort of thing, which I'd never done before. But in a sense, that was easy because that's all pretty formulaic. But it was kind of the little foot in the door, And then this trickster muse of mine found other ways to kind of nudge me into it without me really knowing what was going on. When I graduated from college, actually I continued doing publicity for theater groups on a freelance basis through college, and then I got into PR, where again I had to write, and also made media contacts and began to freelance on the side. Again, still doing mostly magazine and newspaper work. And so little by little, I became a writer without really knowing what I was doing until it was too late to turn back.
Yeah. And you talked about, or you do talk about in some of your interviews, how you had a sort of spiritual awakening at the same time you had a creative awakening.
Yeah. Well, so just picking up the story, I was writing, I was doing PR work, I was doing corporate work, I was doing magazine and newspaper writing. I was doing editing. I was freelancing full time at that point. I was living in Toronto, and I was doing some freelance editing work in house at a lifestyles magazine. And one day I came in, and one of the staff editors rushed up to me and she said, "I just took this creative writing workshop this weekend. You have to take it." At which point I kind of went like that and backed away very slowly, because to me, a creative writing class meant you wrote, you stood up, you read what you wrote, the machine guns came out, you dropped into a pool of blood, and that was the end of that. And my judgment issues, right? And I said no, and it's so funny because this editor was so sweet and so mild-mannered and never pushy at all, and she pushed. And eventually I did sign up and I went, and that was the beginning of something that changed my life radically, both in terms of my spirituality and my creativity. That opened me up to my creativity. And I continued to work with that instructor, first on writing in workshops, and then she became kind of a spiritual and creativity mentor for me. And that really began to open things up. And that's when I began to do really creative work, and not just the kind of, I don't want to diminish what I was doing, but it wasn't highly creative until that point. And it was And that's where I began to teach as well. I actually began teaching because she asked me to teach one of her classes. And I said no. And she asked me again, and I said no. And then she asked me a third time, and I had the most powerfully profound dream. I was doing a lot of dream work in those days. And it was so profound and so like in your face that I had to say yes. And it was in one of the classes that I was teaching that I began my first novel.
Wow. And what was your first novel?
It was The Moon Quest, which I can, if these won't all collapse, I can show you, which is this. It's a fantasy. And I had led my group through an exercise, and I never write in class, except that day, that little voice, that voice of my muse said, you do the exercise too. And it was an exercise involving a tarot deck. I had shuffled the major arcana.
She likes that.
I'm an oracle reader, so I'm like, wow.
But I'll even tell you which deck it was. It was called the Celtic Tarot. It's not in print anymore, alas. And it was one of the older-fashioned decks that didn't have pictures on the minor arcana cards. So I just shuffled the major arcana cards and had everyone pick a card. And then I kind of led them through kind of an open eye visualization meditation based on the cards they had in their hands. And I said, write. And so they were writing, and a little voice said, pick a card. And I picked the Chariot card from that deck. And I just began to write. And what came out of me that evening became the first scene of the first draft of a novel I had no conscious desire to write and no conscious knowledge of at all. And it became The Moon Quest. The Moon Quest became the first book in a trilogy. And that's that story.
That's awesome. I really like the artwork that was on the cover of The Moon Quest as well. It's beautiful artwork. I wanted to ask you if you could explain what a muse is for our audience. As an artist, I know I have one, but many people just are curious to that word.
Right. Yeah. And finally, in one of my later books for writers, I actually have a little chapter talking about what muses are. The muses were Greek gods, demigods. They were all women, and there was, I think maybe there were 8, but I'm not sure. And each one represented a certain group of artistic pursuits, with art being pretty broadly defined. And that's the origin, but it's really come to mean, I think, in contemporary times, your inspiration. And for some people, it takes a more embodied form, and in some people, it does not. It's funny, when I was working with the cover designer for The Voice of the Muse, for the original version, because the book now has a new cover. But this was the cover of the original book as well. And he also, by the way, is the designer who did The Moon Quest, the current version of The Moon Quest. And we were working back and forth, and when he sent me that, I thought, oh, gee, I don't know, because I don't really visualize my muse as embodied, And I thought, I don't want that to be a turnoff to people who. Anyways, I said, would you do me a favor and give me a cover that does not have a person on it? And it was horrible. I mean, it just did not, that cover so captures whatever your vision of the muse is, I think, and that process, that's what we went with.
Just out of curiosity, where are you based out of, or anything like that?
That's a fun question. These days I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I have lived, in 4 states, and 3 Canadian provinces, so I get around. And they haven't caught up with me yet, so.
So I posted on my Facebook wall last night that I was doing an interview with a writing coach, and I asked people if they had any questions about that. One of the persons said that they want to write so bad, but they don't know how to start it because they want it to be perfect.
Well, I've got a lot of answers to that question, and I'll start from the back and move up. If that person is listening, the first thing I have to tell you, unfortunately, and you're not going to like this, is it's never going to be perfect. Ever. It's simply not possible. And let me give you a really cool metaphysical reason why it's not possible, seeing as your audience, is open to that. Um, if you can imagine your story, and I'm using story in its broadest sense, if you imagine that your story is, this energy that's kind of floating around, and as that kind of energy, it's infinite in scope. What you're doing is you're taking that energy and you're bringing it down into something very finite and very physical, which is words on a page. Words and language are wonderful, but they're a box, and energy can't sit comfortably in a box and be in its perfect form. So what you're doing is you're taking something that's ethereal, something that is infinite, and translating it, converting it into something very physical and very finite. There is no way to do that and maintain that original perfection. So all you can do, and I'll also give you a reason why that's a good thing, all you can do is take the idea, the story, the concept, and translate it, convert it to the best of your ability into the words that you have at your level of skill and craft in this moment. Now let me tell you why it's a good thing that you can't take that energy and directly translate it. As a reader, we like to have our own experience of a writer's work. We don't necessarily want to have the writer's experience, we want to have our experience. That's what makes it such an amazing experience, and why we can read books over and over again, because we have different experiences each time. Now imagine if I took a USB cable and plugged it from my brain into your brain, and you got exactly what I was getting, from upstairs. That would not be nearly as satisfying an experience as reading between the lines and reading between the spaces and intuiting and experiencing and feeling your own version of the writer's story. That imperfection makes that possible in ways that the kind of perfection you're looking for simply cannot. So as a writer, yes, I want it to be perfect because I'm human and that's what we want. As a reader, I don't. Because as a reader, I don't want to see the sunset exactly the way you see it. I want to interpret your sunset through my being and have my own experience of that.
That's beautiful.
It is, yeah. I think that's helpful because I feel like a lot of people struggle trying to make their writings perfect.
Yeah, they don't wish to release them or share them with anybody because it's like you said, there's this fear of like underlying judgment. Even if you put your heart and soul into a piece, you're still so worried that someone's not going to see the same potential in the story that you're trying to share.
Well, I think it's because we put our heart and soul into the piece that we feel so vulnerable, and why we want to make it impregnable so that nobody can attack it. That's why I took math, right? Instead of doing things creative when I was in school, because I could not be attacked. I got 1 + 1 = 2. That's it. There's nothing else. But if you're writing, 1 + 1 = anything. And and I may get 5, you may get 7, and you may get 675, and they're all right and they're all wrong all at the same time. It's very interesting to talk to people who've read the Moon Quest, actually all 3 Quintana books, who see things in it that I never saw. That doesn't mean they're not there. That just means I never consciously saw them. And there are certainly things that I see now that I wasn't consciously aware of when I was writing them. And that's the gift of that space that this kind of imperfection allows.
So with your experience in writing, and like you said, you just found things in your story that you didn't even realize you put in there. Would you say that when you write something like that, you're almost channeling it? It's like being brought into you to put on the paper?
There's a line in The Voice of the Muse where I say that it's kind of channeling and not channeling at the same time. And my hesitation about using the word channeling is because it makes it sound, and I actually talk about that in one of my other books, in the Book of Messages, it makes it sound as though you're not involved in the process. It makes it sound as though you have no responsibility for the process. Oh, this whatever is coming to me, and I'm just a vehicle, I'm just a vessel. And when we're writing, we are, a better way of putting it is it's a co-creation. Okay, so going back to the notion of the energy and the infinite and all that ethereal stuff, I'm the one who gets to interpret that. Me, the physical me. And again, and even if you're channeling, and this is again where I have some issues, yes, you are maybe a very clear channel, but it's still coming through your human language and your interpretation based on who you are in your experience. So yes, when we're writing from that place, we're writing from a very deep place, absolutely. And we're writing in a place of, I hope, certainly, I do my best to very deep and unconditional surrender. But the words are my words, ultimately, and I have to take responsibility for them. I can't say, oh, Jesus told me to say this, or whatever. I have to take responsibility. And so from that perspective, it is a co-creation. I am responsible for the words on the page. I have choices to make when those words come to me to put on the page.
Yeah, I love that you said co-creation. I think that's a wonderful term for that. And I did want to talk about the book Messages, because I think, I don't know, I'm just really interested in stuff like that. You said they are words inspired by Melchizedek.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that's this book here. And I'll tell you that story, which, again, like many of my books, is a book I didn't know I was writing when I was writing it. This was back, I think, in 2002. I had just moved back from Hawaii, which was state number 2 out of 4, to Arizona. And I used to go walking. Anyone who knows Arizona knows how beautiful it is, and the red rocks are amazing. There's all those public lands you can walk through. I had a habit of every morning going out walking, and it wasn't unusual, again, using the word channeling, to get information, but I'd never actually spoken it out loud as I was walking, and I'd never recorded it. It was just for me. And one day something came through so profound and so different from anything that I had experienced, that I asked, what is this? Who is this? Where, what's going on? And in the past, whenever I'd asked, I would never get a name. And I understand now what the reasons for that were, and we can talk about that too if you want. But in this day, I got the name Melchizedek, and I was kind of blown away. Very powerful energy, very powerful name, and I was very strongly guided to begin recording these, transcribing them, editing them down a little bit, and sending them out as emails. The very first one I sent out just to a small group of people who, friends, students, clients, saying, if you want more, subscribe. And, within weeks, I had like 400 people subscribing to this thing. And each week or two, I would do another one. And then I got to the I think it was the 12th or 13th message, and there are 13 in the book, where I got very clearly, stop calling these messages from Melchizedek. Start saying they're messages from you, because you carry that energy within you, and it's time that you empowered yourself to own these words, and encourage others to do likewise. Because, in effect, we all carry these energies within us, and they're not separate from us. And going back to your channeling question earlier, by saying they were from Melchizedek, I'm distancing myself from them, and I'm also not taking responsibility for them. And I'm disempowering myself. If I carry that energy within me, then it's part of me. It's not separate from Mark David Gerson. It's integrated within the wholeness of Mark David Gerson. And one of the underlying messages of that book is the message of integration. It's bringing together all the parts of ourselves that we have either abandoned or scattered or refused to acknowledge. The scary ones, the ones we don't like, as well as the really super powerful ones. And the Melchizedek energy for me was one of those super powerful energies that I had not been all that keen on saying, I'm a powerful person in my own right. So that was the message. And of course, interestingly enough, and this really speaks very powerfully, in a sad sort of way, to the underlying way we look at the world, as soon as I stopped saying there were messages from Melchizedek and put my own name on them, subscriptions began to fall off. Because people want the assurance of a name brand, if you will. And they felt, in some cases, I guess, that, who am I to ... It's like we always turn to experts, right? Well, Melchizedek was the expert. Mark David Gerson wasn't, in their eyes. What they couldn't get was it was the same thing, for them as well as for me. So in effect, they weren't getting the message in the first place. So, but that was a story of that book, and I put it out, just as a copy shop book back then, as an ebook after that, and finally, after much encouragement from some friends who had read the manuscript for the first time, put it out again fresh a year or two ago in the book you just saw.
I think it's beautiful. So when you started using inspired by Melchizedek, was it still the same energy and still the same messages that were coming through?
Nothing. I mean, I when I put the book out, I reread it, and I edited out some redundancies, tried to make the text a little tighter, but really no, it's the essence and energy and basis and foundation of what you see in this book now is pretty much what went out in those early emails. It was very clear that I could no longer call them messages from Melchizedek. And so, but it felt as though inspired by Melchizedek was fair. There's a kind of a way to get that energy, the information with that energy there, without saying that I was channeling this directly.
No, I mean, that just makes sense as to why it's important for you to not use the word channeling with your writing, because it is you. It is a piece of you that's bringing that message. So,
you talk about how some of your books, some of your writings, you don't even know what you're writing about. You just start writing and all that kind of pours out. Is that the process that you have for all of your writings and all of your books?
Pretty much. This goes back to your correspondent who asked about the perfection and didn't know where to start. One of the reasons why I wrote my most recent book for writers, which, if I can do this without having everything crash again, very careful, which is this. It's you'll notice the subtitle. It's called "Birthing Your Book, Even If You Don't Know What It's About," because so often I would have people come up to me, and this was particularly true when I lived in Sedona, strangely, who said, "I just feel that I have this book in me, this book I have to write, but I have no idea what it is. What do I do?" And so I thought, okay, this is what you do. You don't have to know what your book is about to start it. And so I certainly did not know The Moon Quest was even a book when I began it. The Voice of the Muse, which was my first book for writers, began as writings for me because I was stuck on the Moon Quest sequel. The Star Quest and Sun Quest, although it's a trilogy, each book is self-contained and is generational, so that the main character in the Star Quest is actually the daughter of the main character in the Moon Quest. And I didn't know those stories when I began. And when I was writing the Sun Quest, which is the last story in the book, suddenly I discovered a tie-in to something in the Moon Quest I'd always wondered about and I had no answer for, and suddenly it made sense. Why something there's something in the Moon Quest called the Table of Prophecy, which is important and that plays an important role, but I never knew why it was called that. It made no sense to me. But that's what it was called, so that's what it was called. Well, finally, in the Sun Quest, the Table of Prophecy actually has a prophecy. Hey, I didn't know that. So by surrendering to the story and to what I call the greater wisdom of the story, and not trying to get in the way and force things to make sense that have a sense of their own. I discover things that make the story richer and more powerful. And that was, so yes, a couple of my books I knew were books. I mean, I knew the Star Quest and Sun Quest were books when I began. The Moon Quest I did not know. The Book of Messages I did not know. Acts of Surrender I did know. Dialogues of the Divine I did not know. So it's kind of a mix. But even when I began birthing your book, and I knew the title, I didn't really know where it was going to go. I just had, again, to trust the process and let the book unfold through me.
Yeah, like you say, I remember you saying surrender to the process. One of the comments on the Facebook status that I wrote about interviewing you, somebody asked if writers sometimes know the endings to their books before they even write them.
Many do, and I never do. There are some writers who cannot begin until they know the end. There are some writers who outline. I have never outlined, even in, I tell this story in a couple of my books for writers, even in school, when you had to hand in an outline with your work, I wrote the essay first, and then I wrote the outline to match it. I could not write the outline first because I didn't know where it was going. How could I write the outline if I didn't know where it was going?
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. I heard you mention that in another interview, and it really just struck home with me. Because in English class, I'd be like, I can't make this outline until I'm done this entire essay. It's not going to make any sense because I know I'm going to go completely off topic.
Right. Right. Well, and I have a book on screenwriting, and screenwriting is outlines and index cards and all these tools are very much part of the screenwriting orthodoxy. And I wrote the book is called Organic Screenwriting, because it was the book on screenwriting I could never find when I went to turn the Moon Quest into a screenplay. And I say, you don't have to outline. And I say, you don't have to. These are fine tools if you want to use them, but people feel they have to use them. And I want to really free people in all my books from the have-tos and the shoulds and the musts and the rules.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of your rules.
Is it the 13 rules?
Yeah, you have some rules to writing yourself, don't you?
I do, and they're all a little bit different from book to book because each book has a certain topic. I have a book for memoir writing, a book on screenwriting, but there are two commonalities in all my lists of rules, which is the first rule and the last rule. The last rule is usually number 13, just because it's a fun number, and those rules are there are no rules. So you read the first rule, there are no rules. Then I go through all the so-called rules. And the last rule is a reminder, in case you forgot, there really are none. And it's not that there aren't ways of doing things or ways of making things easier to do, but I think what happens is we get so caught up in the way things should be, in the ways we're told that things have to be or must be, that we lose sight of kind of the infinite expansiveness, not only of our creativity, but of our lives. Because I also have 13 rules for living, or living a creative life, which doesn't mean you have to be a writer or an artist, that also begin and end in the same way. There are no rules.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. You're really helping people sort of get out of the box. That's the commonality that we have with a lot of the people that we interview. We had an interview with Dixon's violin, and he said that he was an orchestra player for the violin, and that they really kept him in a box, and he had to try and play everything perfect, but he didn't want to be in a box anymore, so he started doing his own thing, and he's so much more happy with it.
Yeah. Again, everybody works in their own way, and that's the whole point of there are no rules. If you want to follow some kind of rule or guideline or be in some sort of box, great. Don't feel you have to be, and don't make anybody else do it just because you're doing it. So
if you don't have rules, what are some tips that you have for people who are looking to get more into their writing?
Okay, so because I have so many, I'm actually going to cheat, if you don't mind, and I'll cheat because one of the questions from one of your Facebook people was about starting a book and not knowing what it was about. This book, actually, Birthing Your Book, has 20 rules because you can never have too many non-rule rules, right? So let me turn to page 65 and just run through a few of them. So the first rule is there are no rules. The second rule is be in the moment. And how that applies to your writing is stop worrying about the next word. Stop worrying about where this sentence is taking you. Stop worrying about where the next sentence is going to be. Stop worrying about the next chapters. Be present in each moment with each word and let that word carry you to the next. Because again, and again, this is a perfect metaphor for life. We get so caught up in what's going to happen that we lose track of where we are. The rule number 3, which we've spoken about, is you don't have to know what your book is about before you start writing. And they're all my books have all kinds of prompts and tips for ways to get started if you're not sure what you're doing. I mean, when I felt really guided to write a memoir, huge resistance. I want you to know that just because I do all that stuff does not mean I don't have resistance. I have huge amounts of resistance. I just have tools for pushing through it. I did not want to write a memoir. I was saying all the same things that all my students in memoir writing classes had said to me, which was, who's going to want to read this? What do I have to say? Anyways, and I didn't know, a memoir isn't just a bunch of stuff. There's a through line, there's a theme to it. I didn't know what mine was. And I only discovered it in the writing of it. And I discovered themes in my life that I did not know were there. And of course, a memoir is called Acts of Surrender. And that really is the through line of my life, which I guess I sort of knew, but never really saw it quite as directly and eloquently and thoroughly. And I just kept coming up with example after example after example in every time and part of my life. So I knew I was writing a memoir. I didn't know what the memoir was about, even though I knew what my life was. I knew my life until I began to write. So you don't have to know anything. All you have to do is write one word and keep going. Other rules: take risks, be vulnerable. Your book is boss. Trust that your story, is smarter than you are. Rule number 11 is it's all in order, even if it's not, which means you don't have to write from start to finish. You can start anywhere and put it together when the time comes. I mean, there's Sarah's Year, my new novel, is about, it spans 50 years. So it's about a lot more than this. There's 2 teenagers back in the 30s, one of whom wants to be a writer, one of whom wants to be an artist. And there's a scene with Sarah, who was the wannabe writer, in English class in high school. She was very fortunate to have the teacher that all of us wished we could have had. She said, I just never know where to start. And her teacher says, start anywhere. And Sarah says, that doesn't make any sense. You have to start at the beginning. That's what beginnings are for. And he said, just because you're starting at the beginning as a reader doesn't mean the writer started there. Just start wherever you start. And for her, it becomes the most liberating thing possible. You can, here's another example from my own life. I mean, it took me 11 years to finish a first draft of the Star Quest. That's 11, 1-1. And there are a lot of reasons for that. When I finally managed to start, I began the first draft 3 times. When I finally managed to push through a first draft, I discovered that one of the things that had happened was that there were pieces in the Star Quest that actually belonged to the Sun Quest, which I hadn't even conceived of yet. I wasn't writing one book, I was writing 2 books, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I couldn't cope. And that was one of the reasons why I couldn't keep going, because I was writing scenes that didn't even belong in that book. And when it came to writing the Sun Quest, I wrote the first draft in 3 weeks because I'd already done a chunk of it. So you can start anywhere and just let the book carry you forward, and trust both in the writing process and the revision process that you'll find a way to put it together.
I think this is so beautiful, and it's definitely going to help me, and I feel a lot of people as well.
I mean, it's helped me even just as writing my blogs. I have such a problem with keeping up to date with my personal blog, because I'm like, I don't know what to write. I feel silly writing about myself, so I like start babbling about a crystal or an oracle reading I did or something like that, and I'm like, well, I'm in the middle of my story. So it's okay to be in the middle of the story and just fill it in.
And the other thing to remember is that This may be less true with a blog post, but it's certainly true with, with a book or a short story or a screenplay. You're only writing the first draft at that point. Regardless of how good or bad the final draft is going to be, that first draft will never be perfect. It'll be, first drafts are chaotic messes. That's what first drafts are for, especially if you haven't outlined and you have no idea what you're doing. It's going to be a mess. The first draft of the Moon Quest, which I hand wrote, I'll have you know, for all kinds of reasons. The printed version, the printout version, was 400 pages. Because I just kept going. I never looked back. I kept going forward and forward and forward. When I finally reread it for the second draft, there was people had 4 different names. The same person had 4 different names, and there was redundancy, and there was things that didn't make sense. But it got the story out. And then when I got into my subsequent drafts, I had a chance to get rid of the redundancies and realign the things that had gone wacky, and really again begin to rein in and polish and hone, and let the masterpiece that was hidden in those 400 pages emerge. And the final book was not 400 pages long. It's like 250, I think.
Wow. This is brilliant. Yeah, I think you have a lot of people, this is totally, I feel completely different about my writing now just from doing this interview. You do the writing coaching and empowerment coaching. Where can people find out about you, and how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. The kind of grand central station of where to find me is probably my website, which is markdavidgerson.com. Mark David Gerson, all one word, and that's Mark with a K, is my username on many social media outlets. You can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Google+, you can find me on Twitter, you can even find me on LinkedIn. But all those links are actually on my website, as are my books and information on my coaching. Yeah, my website is the best starting place anyhow.
Good.
Awesome. How many books do you have, by the way?
With more than I have fingers.
That's awesome.
Not yet, but I still have toes, right? So with Sarah's Year, the newest, I have 12 books, 5 books for writers, 4 novels, the 2 memoirs, and a kind of unclassifiable book of messages. And I have a recording, the Voice of the Muse Companion, which is a recording of my meditations for writers.
And do you have a project that you're working on now?
Well, having just finished a book, I'd like to say that I've earned a rest. I do have other thoughts and ideas. I have another book on writing. I want to do a book on revision, because I think that just like the notion of outlining, people treat the editing process like they're hacking through the jungle with a machete, and that's not, to me, the way to do it. To me, it is a whole body approach. It's a whole body approach, not just a left brain approach. So I have a book on revision I want to do. I'm a little alarmed. Some of the early readers of Sarah's Year have told me that they want a sequel. And that was nothing I had ever envisaged. I'm working on a screenplay of Sarah's Year, so I want to get that done. So I haven't started anything yet, but I have a lot of projects in the queue. Let's put it that way.
That's awesome.
Queue.
Yep.
Okay.
One more question I really had was, do you have a preference on the handwriting versus the typing? I know with the technology age, everyone's like, I gotta get it on the computer right now, but handwriting seems to be a lost art.
Well, I'll tell you my story, and again, there are no rules. I mean, the rule here is, if it works for you, do it. So if you find that handwriting, writing by hand, writing longhand, gets the story out, the book out, whatever it is, more easily, then that's what you do. And if you find that the computer does it for you, then that's what you do. If you find that dictating it, which I cannot do, does that for you, then do that. The reason I wrote the first 2 drafts of the Moon Quest longhand is because I had spent many years writing non-creative, what I would call non-creatively, writing other people's stories for other people's deadlines, and sitting at my desk at the typewriter originally or the computer later was just put me in that productivity for someone else mode, and it just shut me down. So, and of course I began the Moon Quest in '94. There were no laptops like we had now in 1994. My first portable computer was the size of a sewing machine, so so you weren't going to sit on your lap with that. So the only way to get away from my desk was to write longhand. But I also, and here's a little caveat for people, I have horrible, horrible handwriting. Maybe I should have been a doctor. So my strategy on those first few drafts of the Moon Quest was to write longhand in the morning and to type it up at night. Because if I didn't type it up, I would never be able to read it again. But here's the key there. I had to train myself to type it up without changing anything. Because this was not an editing process, it was simply a getting it into the computer process. The Voice of the Muse was written partly longhand and partly on the computer, because I wrote part of it in the car. All my recent books I've done on the computer because now I can, and it's easier. But there is no right, there is no right way, there is no wrong way. This is a direct quote from The Voice of the Muse. There's the way that works for you today, which means if writing longhand works for you today, it may not work tomorrow, and that's okay. And if writing on the computer works for you tomorrow, it may not work for you the day after, and that's okay. Goes back to being in the moment. What works for you now? What gets the story out today? If you can't write on the computer today, write longhand. And now, of course, we have smartphones and tablets and all these other ways that you can get stuff down. You can even write longhand on your tablet, for that matter. And there's some software that'll actually turn that into text for you. Great. So find what works for you, what works for you today on this draft, on this project, and let it work for you today. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, find out what's going to work for you then.
Yeah.
I like that too.
Me too. Yeah, I just had a interesting thought that Mark David is like the Michael Jordan of writing, and as Macklemore, the rapper, says, you change the game, you don't let the game change you. So
That's true.
Appreciate that. I do have one more question for you, which is,
Sure.
when you're writing your novels and your books, do you use one space or two after the period?
Well, if we travel back in time on the Wayback Machine, if you're old enough to remember Rocky and Bullwinkle, you'll remember the Wayback Machine. If you travel back in time to typewriters, then always two spaces. That was a typewriter rule, two spaces. Now there's a raging debate now that we have computers as to whether or not you should have one or two spaces. And I'll tell you where I fall, and then I'll tell you why I fall there, and then I'll remind you that there are no rules. So in the old days of typewriters, every letter and every space and every punctuation mark was an equal width. So a period took up the exact same amount of space as a W on your typewriter. And the way to make it easier to see where sentences ended was to put two spaces after the period, to give some space to the sentence. Today, well, with typesetting, even back then, and with computers today, your spacing is proportional, which means a period takes up this much space and a W takes up this much space. And you don't need that kind of space at the end of a sentence to make the sentence stand out. In fact, if you're right justifying your margin, it can distort the amount of space on the line because you have two spaces. So the reason for double spacing no longer exists. The technical reason for double spacing no longer exists. Go back in time to any books published before there were computers, you will not see double spacing after periods. And it's for that same reason that we don't need it today on computers, because again, we're dealing with proportional spacing. Having said that, there are people who are I mean, this is like a raging, emotional, fierce debate.
So fierce.
And so what I say to you is, if you want to send me an email with 2 spaces after your period, by all means, I won't judge you. However, if you're publishing a book and want it to look professional, then your manuscript, if you're doing it yourself, if you're giving it to a publisher, they'll get rid of that extra space. But if you're publishing your own book on Kindle or CreateSpace or any other, or Smashwords, any other place, and you put 2 periods after your space, you're going to look amateur.
2 spaces after your period.
Sorry. Yes. Or 2 periods after your space.
I was just making sure, yeah.
That too.
There are no
2
rules.
spaces after your
There
period.
are no rules.
But there are no
Use 2
rules.
periods
Yeah.
if you really want to.
That's right.
Well, it's been a great interview. I want to say congratulations on all your books, and
Especially your newest one.
yeah,
That's awesome.
newest one, and the movies. When are the Sunquest movies released?
The Katana movies, well, they're still in process, still in pre-production. So I would like to have seen them on the screen by now. But this is a long process, especially because it's an independent production, and because they are fantasies that involve a lot of visual effects, because fantasies do, which means they're expensive. So it takes time. And I would like to think that maybe in 2016 we'll be in production, but I don't know. What follow me on Facebook and watch for news. That's all. That's all I can say. Meantime, I keep cranking them out, and as I say, there will be a Sarah's Year movie too. The same producer is interested in that project very much as well. So,
Wonderful. Yeah, give us a shout out on the news, and we'll definitely push it out there to our
we
audience.
will promote you in any
Awesome.
way that we can.
awesome. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
So, we have enjoyed this interview. I want to thank you personally, and I am very inspired by your story, and I am excited that we have a special meditation to share with our audience.
Yeah, everybody stay tuned because we're going to do the card readings, of
Mhm.
course, and then a special meditation by Mark David himself.
Which will remind you that whatever you think, you are a writer.
There you go. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Mark David. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise.
Hey guys, Shintastic Shine here. Do you have any aches or pains? Damage from an accident? Or maybe just a bad case of nerves? Have you ever looked into crystal energy therapy? If you take a moment to check out my personal website, you'll find an assortment of items all made with Reiki healing energy. They've also been charged and cleansed by the full moon or candlelight. I also make custom crystal prescription pieces to aid personal selection of aches, pains, and other desires. There are crystals ranging from back pain to heartache, pregnancy, and even protection or abundance. Take a peek today at shintasticshine.com. I hope to see you there. Shine on.
Hi guys, it's Shintastic Shine here doing this week's Shintastic Shine card reading, and I'm using my Angel Dreams deck. I went ahead and flipped the cards as I'm still working without a tripod. And I just think it's important to really take a look at these cards this week because so many people are on the same wavelength. I've seen so many Facebook statuses about it. I've had so many personal messages about it and just people reaching out, and so many people are feeling this way. The first card we have is the Waning Moon card. It stands for introspection and self-inventory. Right now it's been hard for so many of us to step back and think about ourselves instead of thinking about the larger picture. There's many of us that are caregivers and healers and just people who put yourself out there for other people and their happiness. And right now is a time that it's important for you to take time for yourself. Just take a self-inventory. What is it that you really want right now? Not what everyone around you wants, not what's happening, what the universe is throwing at you, what you want, so that you can manifest it into your world. The second card is Hawthorn. Now, I'm not as familiar with the herbs and plants as I wish to be, so I'm still getting familiar with this. However, I do know that Hawthorn it means balance and just really the elemental kingdom. Now, it's also a fairy plant. It resonates strongly with the fairies and all fairy-like energies, so it's important to really connect with the fairies at this time as well. They're trying to help you. They want to help you manifest things. They want to help you make dreams come true. And Hawthorne's also about, like I said, balancing. So balancing that feminine and masculine energy is really important right now. To know when to be gentle and when to be bold is it's a hard line that we're all walking right now, because so many of us don't want to hurt other people's feelings because we know how we're feeling. So it's okay to find that balance. Center yourself and maybe meditate on what is that balance. When is it okay to be bold and stand your ground, and when is it okay to be gentle and help someone who's in need, who's probably feeling a lot like you are and doesn't know how to express it either. And the last card is Obsidian. It is grounding and shielding and into the void type energy. Now, I don't know if many of you know, because it's been a new affinity for me, but I have got a strong connection to Obsidian right now. I usually really gear towards malachite and more green and blue stones, but right now Obsidian has been calling to me so much that Sealmon actually gifted me an Obsidian wand necklace so that it can help just suck the negative energy that's coming at me away, and it works as a very well shield. It just shields me from all that energy. And this week I've had 3 or 4 different people ask me where they can get Obsidian, and I'm looking for some more Obsidian wands to help people out. I make Obsidian necklaces and bracelets and earrings and rings and all that stuff, but just in general I'm trying to find some Obsidian stones to have on hand. So hopefully by the time this airs, which will be soon, I will be able to have acquired a place to get some Obsidian so that I can help you guys. If you need it, let me know. But Obsidian is a black stone, and it just really sucks out any of the negative energy. I do have some Obsidian spears that are really awesome for that too, and it's also good for binding. If you have an energy or you feel as if you're being attacked by a negative entity or a dark spirit, it is getting closer to Halloween or Samhain, and just people are feeling a little crazy right now, and they feel like there's a lot of stuff they need to get rid of. Obsidian is a good crystal to really bind all that negativity into, and often bury it or hide it or get rid of it once you bind that energy into it, unless you cleanse it properly. You have to cleanse Obsidian frequently to release the energy that it's been collecting. So it is important that if you're going to keep Obsidian, you take care of it properly, and it will serve you well. But yeah, overall this reading is just saying that everyone right now as a collective is just in need of some self-time. Take some time, take a walk, write in your journal, read a book, lock yourself in your room, do something to take some self-inventory. Find your inner balance and know that it's okay to stand your ground, be strong, and be gentle, and just try to embrace the love, because so many great things are happening right now, even though it feels like a dark and headachy time. We should all be really grateful and show gratitude for the magical things that are happening. So yeah, this is this week's Shantastic Shine card reading. I hope it's helped you in some way. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at shantasticshine@gmail.com, and I would love to hear from you. Until next time, stay awake and shine on always.
Close your eyes and take a few deep breaths as you relax and listen. You are a writer. You are a writer of power, passion, strength, and yes, courage. For writing is an act of courage. Acknowledge that courage. The courage that got you to this point, having written today if you have, having written just now if you have. You are a writer. Breathe into that. Breathe into the release you felt as the pen flowed across the page, as letters formed into words, words stretched into sentences, and sentences began to fill your pages. Breathe into the freedom, the vibrancy, the love. Breathe into the knowledge and knowingness that you can do it again, and again, and again, and again. You are a writer. What you write is powerful. What you write is vibrant. What you write, whatever you believe in this moment, is luminous. Trust that to the best of your ability in this moment. Acknowledge the writer you are in this moment. Breathe into that. Breathe out judgment. Breathe out fear. Breathe out not good enoughs. Breathe out comparisons. What others have written does not matter. What you have written is all that matters now in this moment. It is perfect in this moment. Know that. Trust that. Breathe into that. If you don't feel ready to read what you have written from that place of trust, discernment, and compassion, set it aside. Set it aside for a time until you arrive at a place of more clarity, more objectivity, more self-love. Don't avoid reading it, but don't feel you have to rush into it. Either way, for now, know that you are a writer. A writer writes. That's what you have done. You have written. You are a writer. You are a writer. You are a writer. You've heard the words. Now speak them with me. I am a writer. I am a writer. I am a writer. Speak them again, believing them to be true. Speak them again, feeling the truth in them. Speak them again, knowing them to be true. For they are true. You are a writer.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Project Bring Me to Life. I hope this episode inspired you in some way. After the show, take a moment and share us on your favorite social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Thanks in advance. Stay awake and shine on always.